Hello and welcome back to our Ontario Network of CAPC CPNP Projects 2024 online conference. My name is Sydney Bell. I'm the network program lead, and I'm delighted to welcome you back to our third and final session of the day and final session of our well, actually 3 days together when we think about our pre-conference activities. And I'm really delighted to introduce our final speaker, Vindra Sahadeo. I'll tell you a little bit about her. Vindra came to Canada with her husband and teenage daughter in 2008 under the Canada Government Federal Skilled Worker Program, a program designed to bring highly educated and skilled immigrants to Canada. Her motivation for migrating to Canada was and still is, as a parent, to provide her child with the best opportunities in life. Vindra is a chemical engineer by profession. She brought with her 2 decades of experience working as an engineer with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, with responsibility for regulating and monitoring the safety of the downstream energy sector industries in the country, as well as 2 decades of experience teaching statistics part-time at the post-secondary level. Vindra has an unwavering focus on leading the community to a place where organizations can authentically demonstrate value for diversity that go beyond the performative measures, where touted values, mission, and vision statements become a lived reality, where cultural proficiency is our way of life, and equal access to opportunities resulting in equitable outcomes for all community members is our status quo. And with that, Vindra, I welcome you and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Sydney, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I would like to start by just acknowledging that the land on which I live, work, and play is the traditional territory of the Ojibwe of Nipissing First Nation, lands covered by the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory, and Indigenous people have sacrificed tremendously for our quality of life. So today we're going to cover some history and definition as it relates to racism, some common experiences that perpetuate harm, hidden messages, the impact, and some strategies to move forward. So I'm taking you on a little journey. Just come with me along this journey. So as we progress, I would like you to understand that what we cover today is just a tiny portion of what we all need to know about racism. And I urge you to take every opportunity to educate yourselves further on this topic as we strive to build a healthy community for us all. This topic can be overwhelming, and it can give rise to strong emotions. I invite you to sit with your emotions and reflect on their roots and how your socialization has shaped your perspectives. I will be making reference to social categories, and when it encompasses skin color, I will be referring to groups of people by skin color to speak to group patterns defined by decades of research. This is not the same as stereotyping. This topic deals with the manifestation of today's racism, and racism is grounded in white supremacy ideology. This is an ideology that has as its core a hierarchy of superiority and inferiority based on skin color, with people with white skin at the top. If the use of these terms is bringing you discomfort, it might be because as a society, we have all been actively and consistently socialized to not talk about racism. It's not polite. Nevertheless, racism is a deep-seated structural and systemic global problem that is very harmful to communities of color. And if we are to move forward in constructing a healthy community for all, then we need to authentically engage in this brave conversation. While I would really like you to be fully present with me on this journey, ultimately, I urge you to please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Okay? So on this journey today, I want to take you back to colonization. We all know about colonization and how it has impacted Canada, starting early 1400s. What many of us may not know is colonization really impacted almost the entire world, not just Canada. I came from the Caribbean. I was taught in high school that Christopher Columbus discovered our islands in 1498. I was also taught that when Christopher Columbus discovered, there were people there already. Our own indigenous people who sadly, most of them no longer exist. So we have similar history. We have a shared history that we need to acknowledge. And if you go into some world history, what you will find is that European colonization not just impacted Europe and North America, it impacted Asia, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, many other places, okay? So as we move through, we know colonization and the history it has with Canada, stolen lands. We may know a little bit of slavery. Some of us may not know that Canada has 200 years of slavery. If you want to learn more about that, just do an internet search for Canada's Slavery Secret. You will find a CBC documentary that gives you more information on that, okay? Now, for many, many centuries, as Europeans colonized the world, stole lands, they needed to make these lands useful for them, right? Add value. How did they do that? They did that through slavery. So for many centuries, we went through that transatlantic slave trade where these slave ships left Europe full of European-made products. They traveled to Africa, to Asia. They offloaded some of those products and they filled back the slave ships with human cargo that moved across the oceans to North America, Central America, Caribbean, South America. Many of us know that slavery was abolished in about 1834. What many of us do not know is that the British primarily reinvented slavery for almost another 100 years. So in the Caribbean, the last slave ship docked in 1917 under a program called indentureship. So people from primarily South Asia were being brought by the British, again, on the same slave ships, to live in the same slave quarters, to do the same jobs that the emancipated slaves were doing. Okay, so it's just a tiny step up. My grandparents were on those slave ships, so it wasn't that far along for me. Those stories have been passed down. They're not pretty stories. Let's move along. Think about immigration policies. I don't know how much you know, but if we go way back in history, the people who were welcome in Canada were primarily Europeans and their descendants. So Canada's immigration policies were open only at the beginning to Europeans who the European governments sent here, gave them hundreds of acres of indigenous land, also gave them money to cultivate that land, okay? They were allowed to sponsor family members. So in the early years, the people who came to Canada were basically Europeans. They were allowed to sponsor their families. That's what we know. As we move along, up until 1967, those immigration policies were still in effect. And if you go through history, there are many laws that were passed preventing other countries from allowing their people to come in Canada, even though Canada was ruled primarily by the British and French, even though a lot of those countries were under British rule or French rule, those people were not welcome in Canada. Around 1967, the immigration policies changed because Canada recognized they needed more skilled workers. They need people with qualifications and skills. And at that point in time, a system was introduced that is still in effect today called the points system. So people were assessed based on their education and the skills, the work experience they had based on the area of study. It gave them some points. Based on that points, they were invited to come to Canada after having passed a very thorough medical examination, okay? Fast forward to today, what we are seeing again, we're seeing an influx of temporary foreign workers, international students coming in right now. We're seeing lots of things on the news about international students. They're overloading our healthcare system. They're causing a housing crisis. Think about what we want to amplify and what we want to trivialize. I'll tell you a little bit about international students. In 2019, the provincial government cut domestic tuition for post-secondary by 10% and put a freeze on it. As a result, post-secondaries were in a bind, keeping afloat. What did they do? They started to aggressively market outside of Canada, primarily to those countries who were colonized by the Europeans, sadly. International students coming now pay between 4 and 6 times the fees local students pay. So we cut the tuition fees for domestic students, we freeze it. Somebody has to pay for the education. Who's paying? International students are coming in by the hundreds of thousands. They're paying 4 to 6 times the fees, and yet they don't seem to be welcome in Canada. There is no clear path for them to remain in Canada as permanent residents right now. If we go back to legalize segregation, if you go through history, you will find a quick Google search is going to tell you a lot about legalized segregation in Canada, whether it's housing, healthcare, education. It's all documented. We know about it. You go back to race riots. One of the earliest race riots were in early 1900s. Why did we have them? We had them because immigrants, again, were becoming a little bit more economically stable. They were doing jobs primarily that local people didn't want. And as a result of that, they were being blamed for taking jobs away from the local population, okay? Today, what we have is racism in many forms. The most popular one, however, is very covert. It's hidden. And according to the research today, it's done when we can justify it with perfectly logical explanation. So I want you, as we move forward, look out for these PLEs, these perfectly logical explanations that we can use to justify our actions, our attitudes, our behaviors, our beliefs. And as we move along, think about what we choose to amplify and what we choose to trivialize or dismiss, and why. Have a look at this picture. This is all over the internet. And the caption on it is, why some of us can live on 40 cents per day and some of us can't. So this is a very old picture, but I still see many parallels of this today. Okay? Okay, so we move next into types of racism. So basically, you have internalized racism, you have interpersonal racism, you have institutional racism, and you have structural or systemic racism. I'll tell you a little bit about each. Internalized racism is a type of racism that we hold internally, okay? And again, it's based on our socialization. It's impacted by our history. It forms our perspectives and our belief systems. It creates in some of us a sense of superiority, creates in some of us a sense of inferiority, okay? All depends on historically which group we belong to. Were we part of the groups of people who have been historically marginalized or historically disadvantaged? Or were we part of the groups of people who have been historically privileged? Okay. Then we have interpersonal racism. Interpersonal racism comes about when we interact with each other. I want you to remember that when you interact with somebody of a different race, a different skin color, different culture, what is at the table is not just what is happening in the moment. Particularly try to remember if your group and the group that that person represent has a history of unfair treatment between them, that is also on the table. And I urge you to move forward with sensitivity, okay? What plays out today a lot in interpersonal racism when we interact with each other goes back to the sense of superiority and inferiority that we hold towards each other. So we see some white saviorism playing out. And again, this plays out when people with white skin think that they are the best people to save people of color from their own cultures. We have white tears playing out a lot when people of color, communities of color, speak up about discrimination they might be feeling or experiences in their workplace or in the community that is causing them pain or causing them harm. We have white tears. Again, that's interpersonal racism. And what it does, it refocuses the conversation not on the person who's being negatively impacted, not on the person who is actually experiencing the racism, but it focuses the attention now on the white person and comforting the white person. Many times in that situation, the person of color becomes the bad person because it's often seen as they're the ones causing the trouble, they're the ones making these people uncomfortable. Another way interpersonal racism plays out a lot is when people of color give feedback to white people, there's many times white fragility playing out, and it surfaces as defensiveness. It surfaces many times as a personal attack. So I want you to just look out for these types of things that might be happening. If a person of color chooses to share with you ways in which something you have done or something you have said has been causing them harm, try to remember that they're doing this because they value the relationship that they have with you, and they're hoping that you would be able to understand and move in a direction where you can deepen this relationship or friendship, When you or if you experience it as a personal attack and come back with defensiveness, it breaks down the communication, it breaks down the relationship. Okay? We talk a little bit about institutional racism. Institutional racism surfaces in an organization culture where white norms is just the status quo. It's just how we do things around here. And how we do things around here is based on European culture. It's Eurocentric. We describe people as not being a good fit, as not being a team player, simply because their culture, their mode of dress, the types of food they might be eating, the clothes that they wear is not European. Think about it. Think about our policies or procedures or attitudes or belief systems and ask yourself, who benefits when we do this? And who does it create a challenge or a barrier for? What defines our organization culture? What defines our status quo? Okay? And when the organization culture throughout the community reinforces each other wherever you go, we have structural or systemic racism that defines the status quo for the entire community. So it's just the way things are done. But think about just the way things are done. Whose culture is it, right? Who is actually experiencing crossing a cultural border when they walk into your organization? Whose lived experiences are normalized and goes into that status quo? Think about it. Think about what it might feel for somebody of a different country, a different culture to exist in your organization. So I take you now to the major players who have done the research in this topic that we're moving into, today's racism, okay? And today's racism, like I said before, presents a subtle, covert racism. So Dr. W.E. Du Bois, Dr. Chester Pierce, Dr. Daryl Wingsu, these are the players in history and in current research. So Dr. Chester Pierce, Dr. Daryl Wingsu, they're both renowned researchers, authors, professionals in the field of medicine, and university professors at Harvard and Columbia universities. They brought forward these concepts starting in the late 60s. Research has been ongoing since. However, 3 decades before that, Dr. W.E. Du Bois, Harvard University graduate, sociologist, historian, and author, was calling attention to what he termed everyday racism in a white world. What is this? In 1940, Dr. William Du Bois published about the persistent everyday racism Black people endure at the hands of whites. It was experienced as a constant surveillance in all aspects of their lives. The sole intent was to keep Black people in their place, to emphasize that they don't belong. To quote him, "I was not a man, I was a Black man in a white world." Fast forward to 1969. Dr. Pierce, as a medical doctor and psychiatrist, explored tools to support the needs of his Black patients, as he found the existing framework to be ineffective. He wrote then, "To be Black in the USA means to be socially minimized. For each day, Blacks are victims of white offensive mechanism, which are designed to reduce, dilute, atomize, and encase hapless Black people in their place." Dr. Pierce continued researching and publishing in this field for the next 3 decades, followed in 2007 by Dr. Daryl Wingsu. So the term microaggression was coined by Dr. Chester Pierce in and around 1969. Dr. Daryl Wingsu in 2007 expanded it and defined it as everyday verbal, nonverbal, environmental snubs, slights, insults, hostile, derogatory messages. And while Dr. Dubois and Dr. Pierce were concerned and were limiting it, microaggressions to racial, Dr. Daryl Wingsu expanded that to go from any privileged identity to any marginalized identity. Okay? So let's talk about that a little bit. We all know that we are part of social categories, okay? So we exist in this world. Some of the social categories, and again, this is not an exhaustive list. Some of them, skin color, white, not white, white, racialized, white, black, brown, whatever you want to call it. Immigration status. Am I Canadian citizen? Am I not? Education level. Education origin plays a big part in discrimination. Where my degree came from, okay? Accent, is my accent European, Eurocentric or not? Language capacity, what languages do we value? Is it just English and French, or do we value everything equally? Gender, male, female, country of birth, communication style. Some cultures' communication styles are more open and direct. Some are not. Which ones do we value? Ethnicity. Ethnicity refers to ancestry, country of origin, where our ancestors came from, okay? Some we value more than others. Cultures, some cultures we value more than others. The origin of our work experience. To this day, even though it's illegal, Canadian work experience is more highly valued than work experience from other countries. So based on these social categories, we have social identities, which is where we belong. We either belong to a privileged identity or a marginalized identity based on these categories. Privileged identities give rise to unearned benefits, marginalized identity, undeserved barriers. So I urge you to spend a minute or two thinking about some of these social categories and their identities, and see how many privileged identities you may have and how many marginalized. So for instance, I'll just walk you through some. My name is Vindra. It's South Asian ethnicity, so it's not European origin. That marginalizes me. It puts some barriers in front of me. Just as soon as people hear my name, see it on a resume, it's not one that they're going to favor. Skin color, it's brown, again, puts me in the marginalized category. Immigration status, I was not born in Canada. Again, I'm an immigrant, puts me in the marginalized category. Education level, I might have some privilege there. I have a master's degree from an American university, okay? So that might give me some privilege. Education origin came from the US, that might give me some privilege. Accent, it's not Canadian, it's not European, it's going to give me some marginality there, okay? So think about where you stand with regard to these and how many privileged, how many marginalized identities you have, how many unearned benefits you get automatically because of you belong to one of those privileged identities, and how many undeserved barriers are in front of you simply because you have some marginalized identities, okay? And what the research is telling us, this is what the research is.
Oh, sorry, Vindra. Apologies for the interruption. There was a question in the chat about from Uma, who asks when using the word language capacity, does that include vocabulary?
It includes a vocabulary, grammar, everything that goes with the language. But when we use language capacity, we're making reference to the language of the country that we're in right now. So in Canada, it will be your capacity to speak, read, write, listen, understand English or French.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you, Vindra.
Okay. So what the research is telling us is for privileged identities, this is what works for them. They have greater access to power and resources. They make the rules, define what is normal, right, and true. Assume to be the leader, smarter, more competent. Can have a patronizing or condescending manner towards marginalized, given the benefit of the doubt most of the time, often unaware of privilege, group membership, and privilege. Emphasizes good intent without listening to the impact of their actions on
My
other.
video stopped.
Less aware about uninclusive and discriminatory treatment of marginalized groups, are more comfortable with members of marginalized groups who share similar behaviors, appearance, and values to themselves, and focus on how far we have come. Pay attention to that last bullet and we'll see what comes next. So, privileged identities focus on how far we have come. Marginalized identities. Less access, often seen as less than, inferior, deficient, often assimilate, collude, abide by the rules, try very hard to fit in, achieve a sense of belonging. Rules are often made for them, but not by them. Their perspectives are often not sought in making decisions that affect them. They track the daily indignities they experience, and they're very aware of oppression. They feel the betrayal from the discrepancy between words and actions of privileged group members. They have an acute sense of exclusion, of not belonging, of being the outsider. They often punish if they challenge the status quo. They have their truth and experiences questioned and invalidated. They know more about members of privileged groups than privileged group members know about themselves. They often struggle with finding a balance between who they are and who they're told they need to be in order to be acceptable. They often struggle with finding their voice and speaking up to challenge. They focus on how far we need to go. Think about that. Now, as we talk about race and racism, these are some characteristics in addition to skin color that plays a major part in racialization of people, okay? So it's not just skin color, accent, the way people speak, their name, or when we say the name, the origins of their name, their clothing and their grooming, their diet, beliefs and practices, leisure preferences, places of origin, citizenship, okay? So think about all those characteristics that goes into racializing people and goes into treating people differently, especially lesser than. So to keep it local, we're looking at the OHRC policies and guidelines on racism, okay? So what we have there, race is a social construct. It categorizes, judges, and creates differences based on certain characteristics. This is coming from the OHRC policy and guidelines on racism. Racism is an ideology that asserts that one race, white European, is superior to all others. And white Eurocentric culture is accepted as the standard by which all others are measured and found to come up short. White supremacy is a belief system grounded in superiority or inferiority based on skin color, with white skin color at the top and black at the bottom. Again, I would advise you to go find this document. It's a publication by the OHRC, Policy and Guidelines on Racism. Has a lot of useful information. Again, according to the OHRC, racial discrimination is the illegal expression of racism. Note the term illegal there. It includes any action, intentional or not. It's not about intent. That has the effect of singling out persons based on their race and imposing burdens on them and not on others, or withholding or limiting access to benefits available to other members of society in areas covered by the code. And the code there is the Ontario Human Rights Code. Race only needs to be one factor in a situation for racial discrimination to have occurred. Think about that definition of racial discrimination according to the OHRC. It's illegal. It's not about intent. It's about impact. And I urge you to think about who experiences the impact. Is it the perpetrator? Is it the target? And whose opinion should we be paying attention to? Think about imposing burdens on people and not on others, withholding or limiting access to benefits available to other members of the society. Again, according to the OHRC, subtle and covert racism is the most frequent today. And we're going to talk more about that. Subtle and covert, often hidden. Often we can justify it with a lot of perfectly logical explanations. Think about what we choose to amplify and what we choose to trivialize and dismiss, and who benefits and who it creates barriers and challenges for. Again, according to the OHRC, it has long been established in Canadian law that intent or motive to discriminate is not a necessary element for finding that a discriminatory act took place. It is sufficient if there is a discriminatory effect to the conduct. What do we mean by that? How does it look from the outside? Does it look from the outside that one group is being favored and not another? Okay. And according to Ibram Kendi, a racist policy is any policy with a racially inequitable outcome. Again, I urge you to examine your policies, your procedures, your organization culture, and be honest and truthful in your determination. Who does it benefit? And who is it creating challenges and barriers for? And as the good human beings we all are, if we are noticing that it's creating challenges and barriers by race or culture or dress or accent or language or that whole other list of other characteristics I gave you earlier on, why are we happy with it? Why aren't we doing something to change it? Okay. Think about, are we the people who are creating barriers for other people? Or are we the people who are actively looking for barriers and removing them so that we have equitable outcomes for everyone? And we will take a breather here. Some words of wisdom from Dr. Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. Whether that's a good feeling or a bad feeling, it stays with them. So again, we're going back to Dr. Daryl Wing Su with microaggressions. These are the subtle, covert type of racism that we are seeing a lot of today. According to him, they are everyday verbal, non-verbal, and environmental snubs, slights, and insults, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely on their marginalized group membership. Okay, and we spoke about those marginalized group membership before, not just race. He's expanded this to be all those privileged and marginalized identities that we have. whether it's country of birth, whether it's our language capacity, whether it's where our education came from, whether it's our housing status, okay? So verbal microaggressions. Names, people's names. There is a lot on the ground about people changing other people's names in organizations, in classrooms, to give them Canadian names because your name is too hard to say. Canadians gonna have problems saying your name, so we'll give you a Canadian name. That's real. That's racism. Okay. Repeatedly mispronouncing somebody's name after you've been corrected numerous times. It tells me that you don't think I'm important enough for you to learn how to say my name. Privilege and marginalization, think about it. A Black supervisor and manager. Many times, if we have a white person and a Black person together and the Black person happens to be the supervisor or manager of the white person, eyebrows raised. People are in disbelief, okay? Many times we see it that they bypass the Black supervisor or manager and move towards the white worker, just assuming they are the supervisor or the manager, okay? Repeatedly confusing two Black staff or two people of color and taking one for the next, okay? Denying, defensiveness, trivializing, becoming the victim, using those perfectly logical explanations, seeking absolution when called out on perpetuating racism, expressing white fragility, telling people of color that they're so articulate, they're well-spoken, their English is so good and they're so smart. What you're actually saying is you didn't think somebody who looked like me would be all these things, so you're really surprised, which is insulting to me. Again, racism. Okay? Asking people where they come from repeatedly. The assumption there is you don't belong here. Oh, okay. Exoticizing people. You're so exotic. Really, only fruits are exotic. Repeating, rewording, explaining what a racialized person just said. So what you're doing there is trying to tell them they're not smart enough to make that statement, okay? Making comments about people's hair, it's different from yours, and white-splaining, explaining to Black people what racism really feels like. Some more cultural appropriation, I'm sure we all know of, okay? Normalizing of white Eurocentric standards, cultures, values, and beliefs. Think about whether this happens in your organization. It is used as a benchmark for what is acceptable, normal, and professional. Yet we all speak about EDI and how inclusive we are. You know, what is your benchmark for what is normal? Whose culture is it? And how do you think other cultures feel in your space? Okay. We spoke about some of these things already, right? Offloading all diversity work on racialized staff without any compensation. Minorities only in entry-level or middle management positions. We see that in many organizations today who claims that they have diversity on staff. The diversity is only at the bottom level of the organization, okay? Dr. Daryl Wingsu further classified micro assaults, micro insults, micro invalidation. Micro assaults, micro here doesn't refer to small pleas. It refers to the frequency. It happens so often that people don't see it. It's just the norm. It's just the way things are right now, okay? Discriminatory actions, overt, conscious, intentional. That's the assaults. Insults, rudeness, insensitivity, demeaning people's heritage and identity. And the invalidations, the micro invalidations cut the deepest. The subtle exclusions that happen in meetings. Oh, well, it's not that we excluded you from this meeting. It wasn't really a meeting. It was just like a chat over coffee. We didn't exclude you really. Or the negating people's experiences when they tell you about how your behavior cuts deep. Invalidation, minimizing, trivializing, nullifying, redefining thoughts, feelings, experiential realities of racialized people. Think about what that does to people when they are experiencing it many times a day, every day, in places that they should be safe. Think about that. Micro assaults, while the behavior is overt, the perpetrator may openly deny it by making excuses when called out, such as telling a racist joke, using a derogatory slur, white solidarity in the face of racism. What does that look like? If you have one or two people of color in an all-white organization and they raise an incident of racism that cuts them deep, look out for where the white staff come together to deny, to trivialize, to minimize, and the Black or the person of color becomes the bad person. Micro insults assume that goodness equates to whiteness. Look at these statements and see whether you've heard any, you've used any happened in your space. We have a question. Uma?
I can wait till the end.
Oh, no problem. Micro insults, common themes. Ascription of intelligence, the second-class citizen, pathologizing cultural values and communication styles, meaning that any cultural value or communication style that's not white or Eurocentric is a bad one. And the assumption of criminality. Think about this statement. Micro invalidations are communications that subtly exclude, negate, or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential realities of others. The most damaging form of the three microaggressions because they directly and insidiously deny the reality of marginalized groups. Think about whether that plays out in your organization. Some more micro-invalidation. Alien in one's own land. That's asking people again and again, where are you from? And they probably were born in Canada, but because they don't look like what our image of a Canadian should be, we keep asking them where they're from. Expressing the concept of colorblindness, saying that we don't see color. What that means to a person of color is you don't see me and you don't see people like me or our experiences. The myth of meritocracy that says the playing field is even for all of us. And if we all work hard enough, we can all have the same outcomes. Truth of the matter is the playing field was never even. Remember, history has a big part to play in it. Think about colonization and slavery. Think about intergenerational wealth that passed from generations to generations. Think about when slavery ended, the European governments paid the slave owners compensation for freeing their slaves. What did the slaves get? Nothing. And denial of individual racism when people of color point out in an organization that is predominantly white that they have experienced racism from somebody in the organization. People get together to deny it in the form, oh, that's not what he meant, or she's a really good person, she would never harm anybody. So what you're doing really is you, again, nullifying, minimizing, trivializing my experience. you are in effect redefining my experience so that you and people who look like you can remain comfortable. Think about what that means. And to recap, racial microaggressions, racist everyday actions that occur all around us by people who believe that they are fair-minded and without prejudice, possibly without any conscious intent or malice, usually unaware of how their comment, tone, or behavior negatively impacts others, goes from privileged to marginalized identities, has a horrendous impact. Some examples here, okay? We spoke about a lot of them. The theme, the example, the message. Okay, so we spoke about a lot of them already. Again, micro, like I said before, in the word microaggression, does not refer to small. This is what it actually refers to, okay? Invisibility, frequency, everyday, all day, normalized, commonplace, accepted, status quo. But the impact, it's horrendous, it's brutal, it's constant, it's ever present, and it adds up. Power of microaggressions lies in its invisibility to privileged group members combined with the brutality of its impact on marginalized group members. Robin DiAngelo describes the effect of racial microaggressions on communities of color using these words. Think about you having to experience this many times a day, every day in your life, and what it would do for you, okay? These are some of the impacts. Deny minority populations equal access and opportunity. Again, these are some behaviors that perpetuate racial harm, according to Robin DiAngelo, okay? So how do we move forward? Disrupting. First, honest, truthful reflection. Do I have a desire to disrupt racism? Honest and truthful on a scale of 0 to 10. Just give yourself an honest, truthful score. Ask yourself, do I really have that desire to disrupt racism in all the spaces that I'm in? What's my score from 0 to 10? Do I honestly have the knowledge? Am I able to identify it? I can't disrupt something if I don't know what it looks like, right? If I can't identify it, if I can't recognize it, I can't disrupt it. Do I have the knowledge? Be honest with yourselves. Do I have the skills? Now, we can have all the knowledge, but if we have not practiced, then we don't have that skills, right? We can watch as many YouTube videos as we like on swimming, for instance, unless we get in that water and try, we don't have those skills, right? So if you've never tried disrupting, do you have the skills? And do you have the will? On that scale of 0 to 10. When I say the will, am I committed? Think of something that you yourselves are genuinely committed and dedicated to, and think of the time and effort that you put into it, the resources that you put into it. Do you have that will to disrupt racism? Desire, knowledge, skills, will. The journey starts with you. Keep in mind at the top of your mind the historically marginalized communities. Who are they? Where are they now in your spaces? Think about your status quo, policies, procedures, decisions, attitudes, behaviors. Who do they benefit and who do they create barriers and challenges for? Do some critical internal self-examination. Again, the journey starts with you, the part you play. The root of your biases, and we all have biases. There's no getting away from that. It's part of being human. And do I really have the desire to actively, truthfully, honestly, and continuously work to eradicate racially biased decision-making? And am I committed to no more perfectly logical explanations? And lastly, after perpetrating a racial microaggressions, do the work necessary to understand why your words and actions were racially microaggressive. How did I come to unconsciously or consciously hold deficit beliefs about whatever group? How has white supremacy and institutionalized racism shaped my socialization processes and influenced my beliefs and behaviors? And what steps do I need to take to unlearn this? Examine. We spoke about this already. Policies, procedures, decisions, attitudes, perspectives, beliefs, actions for racial equity in outcomes and impact. What am I willing to amplify and what am I willing to trivialize and why? Who does it benefit and who does it create barriers for? Where are those historically disadvantaged communities? How does it appear from the outside? Who does this benefit by group membership? Who does it create barriers for by group membership? Does this have a racially equitable outcome? What do I need to do to address this? How to respond as the perpetrator of a microaggression? Please accept feedback on your racism as a gift. Like I said before, a person of color will not bring this up to you if they didn't think the relationship they had with you was of value. Acknowledge the harm that you've done, apologize, express some gratitude for it being brought to your attention, commit to doing better. Do I have the desire to do better? Do I have the knowledge? Do I have the skills? Do I have the will? That brings me to the end. And I see we have some questions.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Vindra. There was I believe Uma had a question. Did you want to come on camera or unmute or join us, Uma? And
I'm just going to unmute.
sure.
I did have a question for you, and I don't know if I'm asking this incorrectly. So, you know how we always reflect back on colonization and white supremacy, but what my concerns are around, like, as we grow as a country and we have different people migrating at different times, what happens when there is non-white kind of racialized issues? How do we address that? Like, I feel like, so for example, I'm brown, and as soon as someone sees me, and this never comes from someone who is white, I'm going to be really honest, people always assume that I've just come into the country in the past 5 years. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm always treated like a newcomer, and that's the conversation they have with me at work, and that's fine. But I'm just asking, like, what happens in between? Because in a lot of the countries that were colonized, there's issues between different colors, right? So sometimes that just gets brought into Canada as we move here. And so have you noticed that, and how do you see workplaces sort of address that sort of issue? Does that make sense?
It certainly does, Uma. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
you were going on?
No. That was what I was trying to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, so like you said, colorization is a big thing, right? Colorism, sorry. Okay. So we know it's a big market. We see all those fade creams on the market making billions of dollars, skin lighteners, okay? And again, that is the impact of colonization. People with white skin, people with lighter color brown skin are more valued than other people. We see exactly what you're talking about in the workplace. Anybody who's not white is assumed to be immigrant, okay? Where are you coming from? Where did you come from? So we have lots of people who were born in Canada with non-white skin being treated as immigrants, okay? And it all depends on what people have internalized, how they interpret that experience. So we are all at different journeys with regards to internalizing racism. And we have all internalized it, believe you me, okay? So it's a journey, like I said, and it depends on where you are on this personal journey. Some people are at the point where if they don't have white skin, they have brown skin, they have darker brown skin, they have black skin. The inferiority is real for them because that's what they have learned. That's what they have been socialized in this world for hundreds of years, okay? And as a result of that, they will respond differently from somebody who maybe have the same skin color, but is in a different place in their internalization of racism. They've gone past that and they have come to understand, I'm good, okay? I am where I need to be. So again, to answer your question, Uma, it's all based on what we have internalized and where we are on this journey.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Uma. Any other comments or questions for Vindra before we do our coffee card giveaway, our last one of the conference? There's lots of gratitude being expressed for you, Vindra, in the chat. And I'll add my voice of gratitude to that as well. I very much appreciate you taking the time and bringing your experience and knowledge and wisdom to our gathering. And so I'll do just one more little check-in. And if there's anybody who does have any additional questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. And otherwise, let's get on with the coffee card giveaway. I was listening to Vindra's presentation, and I have 3 questions for you. One is this first one's from fairly early in the session, and it was I think I've heard this before, but it's always that important reminder of our own history in Canada. So Vindra shared with us that Canada has how many years of slavery in our history? And I see 200 years there. Char has come up with the right answer there. And Char, if you could message me your full name here on Zoom so I can make sure to connect with you. I've got, sorry, an admin message popping up on my computer. Okay. Oh, Charlotte Lapointe. Okay, thank you. Let me grab that. I just need to make sure to keep track of all of this so I don't lose track. Okay, next question. Congratulations, Charlotte. Okay, what does, I'll put it in the chat here as well. What does PLE stand for that Vindra was referring to during her? Okay, looks like Mandy is pretty quick there on the draw. Perfectly logical explanation. That is something that we can keep watch out for in our own thinking and actions that may contribute to to our own racism. So thank you, Mandy. And if you could also message me your full name, that would be helpful. The final one here, I've got a couple, I just need to choose one. Okay, how about Mandy, okay, sorry, I'm just going to grab this while I can because otherwise I will, so it's not Mandy, it's Joanne, is that right? Joanne Dalton won that last coffee card. Okay, let me just get, pardon me. Okay, and the last one is and there's a few right answers for this, to name one characteristic in addition to skin color that can contribute to racializing people. And looks like I see lots of answers coming up there. Jeremiah put ethnicity. So congratulations to Jerry. Okay, that is bringing to an end our session on anti-racist practice, and I'd like to once again offer gratitude to Vindra for joining us, and thanks to everybody who came and participated. Very important information, and I'm glad we have had a chance to learn together and to have more resources to bring an anti-racist lens and approach to the work that we do in communities and families. So thank you. And with that, we have now reached the end of our well, actually 3 days together with our pre-conference activities on Wednesday. And I'd like to welcome, I'm actually going to stop recording. Okay.